Ginny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 116 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
Today we interview Lois Lowry about her book, The Giver. Lois has written more than 20 books for young adults and is a two-time Newbery Medal winner. She was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, did elementary school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania,
Woohoo!
and attended junior high in Tokyo, Japan. Lowry attended Brown University and majored in writing. She left school at 19, got married, and had 4 children before her 25th birthday. After some time, she returned to college and received her undergraduate degree from the University of Maine. Lowry didn't start writing professionally until she was in her mid-30s. When she's not writing, she enjoys gardening during the spring and summer and knitting during the winter. One of her other hobbies is photography, and her own photos grace the covers of her book Number the Stars, The Giver, and Gathering Blue.
What I think people are going to enjoy about this interview with her is she covers a big piece of her life through it. As an author, she's fascinating. So she shares about her life as a young girl who's kind of a bookish girl and shy, all the way up to some current information about her life. And through understanding her, then I think you understand the books and what's pouring out of her as she's writing.
Yeah, and we do talk about empathy, and she strikes me as such an empathetic individual. She understands the human condition, and she's very open about her own human condition. I just ended up loving this interview.
Yeah. Me too, Nancy.
Well, here's our interview with Lois. Well, welcome, Lois, to our front porch.
Thank you. I love front porches. I have one of them myself.
Oh, I love that.
Well, we're so pleased that you could join us here today. And we know that you were an avid reader growing up. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Probably from the time I realized that human beings wrote the books that I loved, which would make it age 7 or 8. But I'll just tell you a little story. Some years back, I was out at Brigham Young University for some kind of conference. And a graduate student there, a young man, he'd done some research on me before I came. And he brought me a page from a children's magazine published in August 1947. And it was a magazine to which I subscribed at the time. In 1947, I was 10 years old. I think probably somebody gave me a subscription every Christmas. And the centerfold, I shouldn't use that word, it makes it sound like, but the 2 pages in the center was always letters from children. And so for some months, maybe even years, I had written letters to that magazine. And in August of 1947, they published a letter by me. And this young man brought it to me. I had no memory of having written it. But in it, it said, after describing my family and some other boring things, it said, I am writing a book. It is called A Dog Named Lucky. I am on chapter 13. I have no memory of that, but it doesn't surprise me because at that age, 10, I was always writing a book. So by that time, in answer to your question, I already passionately wanted to be a writer. Took me many years to get around to actually doing it, but I was starting out when I was 10.
Oh my goodness, that's such a young age to have had that kind of interest and to have really followed up on that as an adult.
But I will tell you that I know this from the email I get from kids. There are many 10-year-olds who want to be writers. Probably fewer now than a few years back because other things have claimed their attention, sadly. But it is not surprising to me to hear about a 10-year-old wanting to be a writer.
Hmm. When you were young, had you met any authors and that was the light bulb?
No, no. And in those days, I mean, kids meet authors now. Authors visit the schools
Yeah.
and by Zoom. I mean, I seem to be always on a Zoom with a classroom around the world. But in those days, authors were remote, unapproachable people. It would never have occurred to me to write a letter to an author. However, there was a favorite book of mine at that age, and this name is probably still familiar to teachers and librarians because she won the Newbery Medal. And her name was Lois Lenski, Lenski. And I had a book by her, which was called, and this would be politically incorrect now, it was called Indian Captive. And it was a novel for kids, but it was based on a true set of events. And she illustrated the books herself. The little girl looked like me. She was skinny and had long blonde hair. And it was a true story of a little girl who had been kidnapped after her family was killed by Native Americans, I believe in upstate New York. And she had lived with those Indians who took her until she grew up. And so it's a wonderful portrayal of that life in which she eventually was very happy. But because her name, the name of the author, was Lois, as was mine, I felt such a kinship to that book. And because the child in the book looked like me, and in fact, the Indians, the Native Americans, as I should say now, called her because of her light blonde hair. They renamed her Corn Tassel, like the silk that comes out of the end of it. So secretly, at that age, I thought of myself as Corn Tassel.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I thought of that author as somebody very close to me, as if she knew me. Never met her. She's long dead, but I have a fondness for her still.
Oh, that's a great story. You said that all of your books deal with the theme of the importance of human connection. And I was thinking about that and thinking about how you moved around as a child quite a bit. Lenny and I moved around as children also. I was wondering if that moving around for you established the importance of human connection and that no matter where you go, humans are humans and the importance of community.
Yes, yeah. I've never been asked that question in that way before, but certainly that would be true. And I should explain that, and Lenny knows this, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where I spent my childhood, although I'd been born in Honolulu, was where my mother had grown up. Her father was the president of the Carlisle Trust Company, the bank on Main Street. But Carlisle is also the home of the Army War College. And she met my father when he was stationed there, married him, and therefore she became a military wife, and I became an Army brat. And that's why I was born in Honolulu. So war begins when I'm 4 years old. And we leave Hawaii, and we're back in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And my father goes off to the Pacific, and he's gone for most of my childhood. But when the war ends, then he was able to come back, but he had to return to Japan. And when they were ready for dependents, mothers and children, to join the occupation forces in Japan, we went to Tokyo to live. And then when the Korean War began, 1950, July, I came home from the swimming pool where I spent summer afternoons to find my mother packing. And she says, we're going back to the States. Daddy can't come. Casualties were beginning to come in from Korea. And my father was nervous about his family being so close to where the war was taking place. So he sent us back to Pennsylvania, and I went to ninth grade in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I'm not answering your question, but now I'll try to. I was a very, as I've already described by becoming Corn Tassel, I was a very bookish child. I was an introvert. I still am. Most writers are, I think. Very shy, painfully shy. And so once the war ended and we started this moving from place to place, I was continuously being thrust into new situations, new neighborhoods, new towns or cities, as the case may be. One was New York City. New schools where I was the new kid. And that was difficult because of my personality, which was so shy. On the other hand, it made me, or perhaps I already was, very observant. And in the smallest and most trivial of ways. For example, you may not remember this, but it was probably true during your adolescence. Every school in every geographic area, there are clothing fads, and you're not cool if you don't dress the way those kids do, the popular kids. But when you arrive suddenly in the middle of a school year, you don't know what the clothing is. I'm thinking particularly of socks.
Oh,
There were places where, do kids wear socks now? I'm not sure, where you wore your socks up. Other places it was important to fold your socks over. That seems so silly now, but I had to observe all of that in order to get my bearings, in order to fit in order to make friends. I didn't want to be the new kid who didn't know how to dress or talk, or I had to observe, and learn all those things in order to become part of a community again and again. At the same time, setting aside the school thing, I was frequently in a new, like moving to Tokyo at age 11. Tokyo now is a very sophisticated city, but in 1947 it was rubble. But there were these people out there, and I was fascinated by them. And my father had bought me a bicycle, and I used to ride around the streets of Tokyo, which was quite safe then and would be quite safe still, just observing. And because of the language barrier, eventually I could speak a little Japanese, but not at first. I didn't have to talk to anybody. And so I started to say a trained observer, but nobody trained me. I trained myself out of the necessity, out of the need to become part of a place. And I think that kind of observation is something a writer needs, and I needed and came up with somehow.
I think that's fascinating that you moved to occupied Japan, our former enemies, just a year or two earlier. What experience was that as a child? Here you are living in this land. These were the people we were fighting against, and now suddenly you're there and you're seeing the people.
Yeah. I'll point out that at that time, there was no television. And so I was not privy to the terrible atrocities that had occurred during wartime. Also in Europe, the Holocaust. Later, that was all made available to me, but during my childhood, I wasn't able to view it through that lens. So instead, it was more for me. There was a series of books. I read them in third grade, and each book was about a pair of twins. There were the Belgian twins, the Eskimo twins, and there were the Japanese twins. And so I've gone back and looked at them. They're quite good, actually, in portraying a culture different from our own, and through the eyes of 8-year-olds. And so my view of Japan was that view, romanticized Japan. The rubble, of course, took me by surprise. But also, Japan at that time, there were very few men around. We had several Japanese women living in our house, working as housemaids for us. I attended an international school, so there were no Japanese children in my school. But I'll tell you a story. Again, I tend to gravitate toward incidents, toward stories in my life. School bus picked us up each day from our American housing. The bus driver was a man, a Japanese man, and we would have known his name and greeted him by name, but I've forgotten it now. And one day, before Christmas, the bus arrived, and I got on the bus, and I will say the school went from 7th grade through 12th, so it was high school kids. I was 11 in 7th grade. I was probably the youngest child on the bus. and the bus driver had decorated the bus for Christmas, and there were cheap, tawdry Christmas decorations all over the bus. I knew enough to know at that time that that bus driver was likely not a Christian. It was not his holiday. He would have been Shinto, I assume. But I brightened and smiled at the sight of the decorations, and he smiled at my smile. Okay, so I took my seat, my 11-year-old in my seat, and as the bus is going into Tokyo, lengthy trip into our school, the high school boys on the bus started fooling around. And they started pulling down the decorations and throwing them at each other.
Oh.
And I remember sitting in my seat, and from where I sat, I could see the rearview mirror, and I could see the driver's face. And I've never forgotten that feeling of inability to do anything. As I say, I'm a little girl on a bus full of high school boys, and I didn't even have the nerve to say, don't do that. I just sat there torturing myself with what that bus driver was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no end to that story. It was just an incident, but it was something that probably I encountered again and again in various ways. The discrepancy between victor and victim. And so I gradually became aware of that, but I never stopped liking the Japanese people. And just the other day, I went to a Japanese movie called Rental Family. It's a popular movie now. It's gotten good reviews. A friend of mine saw it, and she said she didn't like it. I loved it because I just moved into that world again. And I do that again and again in my memory. And also, I've gone back 4 times. And I feel the same way every time. I feel very much at home in Japan, but never with a feeling of warfare and enemy. That's never been there for me.
I feel that feeling, that description of you on that bus. And it's the juxtaposition of the kindness and the graciousness of that bus driver and the complete disregard and callousness of those boys.
And of course, we know adolescent boys are frequently idiots and
yes.
behave that.
Yes.
Well, I have sons and I have grandsons, and they probably all have behaved badly at times. But yeah.
So, as a writer, you've talked a couple times about your readers. Do you have a sense how your readers have changed over the years? Do children now have different concerns or ways of viewing the world, or are they essentially similar to the children who first read your books in the 1990s?
I think my first book was for kids was published in 1977. And my first response from readers was by letter, because no email then. I mean, maybe there was email, but I didn't have it, and readers then didn't have it. And I feel as though, looking back on that, the readers were more patient with lengthy books, with slower moving books, as I had been as a child. But I'm getting this also from publishers, also that they perceive the need for a faster paced book because the attention span has been reduced by media, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And that seems a shame to me because I remember loving being curled up with, for example, The Secret Garden.
Yes.
Which it's very slow going, and I doubt if any little girl, there might be an occasional bookish little girl, but those books are not popular anymore, and probably my early books would not be either. So a speeded up kind of fiction, which is sad because you lose a lot with that, I think. Mm-hmm. But that's been my experience and my observation.
Mm-hmm. Is your sense that children are still facing similar challenges in their lives as children growing up thinking about their place in the world, or similar or different from in decades past?
I think some things are similar, but were not around in my childhood. Let me back up and explain what I mean by that. When I was a child in elementary school, small town, Pennsylvania, I knew no child who had divorced parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually, as times changed and things changed, that became a problem for children, and one that's been addressed often and sometimes very well and probably sometimes badly in fiction. And I think that's important for children to be able to identify themselves by reading a book in which a child has the same problems that they're undergoing. It gives them a partner on a difficult journey that they're having to make. I don't think there was fiction of that sort around when I was a child because it wasn't needed.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there were books. Little Women was one that dealt with the death of a child, but it dealt with, in retrospect, so unrealistically. You may recall Beth spouts a few Christian platitudes before she dies peacefully.
Yeah.
At the same time, however, that I read that, age 9, 10, I read The Yearling, which was published for adults. But in that book, the boy who was my age and who also looked like me, my copy of the book had illustrations by N.C. Wyeth, and the boy Jody was skinny and blonde, just like me, and my age. And his best friend dies during the book, and it's realistic. It's a book for adults, and I wept copious tears. But I loved that book a lot more than I loved Little Women because I could sense, without stating it, that it was real, and Little Women was fantasy. So I think the problems that kids face, some are universal. The death of someone in a family or a friend, that's a universal experience that many children will have to experience. Now, as I mentioned, divorce is common, and family disruption and step families and all of that. And those things are available to kids in books, and not just available, but necessary and helpful. But there are also now, I'm observing from reading about them, because I don't tend to read kids' books, there are beginning to be a lot of books about bullying, for example, which has become an issue for kids. That didn't exist in my day. There was a very bad boy who sat next to me in fourth grade, but he wasn't necessarily a bully. He was just a bad kid. So I think things move in series and as they happen in real life and become issues. And then authors address those issues. And 10 years from now, the issues will be different. Authors, I think, scramble, understandably and rightfully, to figure out what the issues are that they should be writing about. And that's what publishers, of course, want to publish.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about The Giver. It's our book this month, and we both really enjoyed it. The book is really a trade-off between living this easy life without a lot of power, without a lot of knowledge, little feelings, and then living a life of joy and feelings and suffering and pain and living it fully. What resonates about this theme with your readers? What kinds of feedback are you getting? This book is just very popular.
It is. And you can't predict that when you're writing a book. You can't think, oh, what's going to be popular? And so that took me by surprise when that book was published. I think it was published in 1993. It almost immediately acquired a different audience from what my previous audience had been. And I began to get letters from adults. And I don't exactly know how that happened, but I think the only route would have been kids coming home from school and saying, Mom, read this book, which I read in school, or Dad. I remember getting a letter from a Qantas airline pilot in Australia. I got a letter from a Trappist monk saying that in his monastery, which is I'm not Catholic, I didn't know this before, it's a silent order, they don't talk. But they're read aloud to. And he said the readings that are read to us at mealtime are deemed either recreational reading or sacred reading. And he said we have designated The Giver as sacred reading.
Wow.
And he went on to say why. Because they viewed it as so much like their own lives, controlled, but maybe At any rate, so
Wow.
suddenly
Interesting.
I have this whole other audience that it was no longer kids saying, I had to read this in school. Would you please tell me all the similes and metaphors? I need this information by Thursday. Our audience disappeared. However, you asked in a previous question about changes I've observed, and I forgot to mention this one. This was not true in the beginning, and maybe email is what made this happen. And it doesn't happen very often. And I will say it's often boys, adolescent boys, who send offensive emails to me, and often about the giver, because they're required, often that book is required 7th, 8th grade. That's an age at which boys are feeling their power, and suddenly there's a lot of power sending an email to an author out there. And I have come up with what I think is a great answer to them. When they write me an email like this, we had to read The Giver in school. Me and my friends all hate it. It is boring. Okay?
Right.
And so I reply, I'm so sorry that you found the book boring, but I think I know why. I said, it's intended for an older audience, and you didn't tell me your age, but I'm guessing you're probably about 8.
Yes.
Try reading it again when you're 13 and more mature, and maybe you'll enjoy it.
Oh, you're a little spicy.
That might be cool.
Lois, that's hilarious.
I love that response. That is fabulous.
Anyway, those letters don't happen very often, but I'm amused by them when they do.
What are the positive things kids are saying about your books, especially The Giver, since that's the book we're...
They have to read it. Often it's assigned in school, and so they pick it up and, boring book. And then they find themselves caught up in it. And what they're appreciating, what they're reacting to is the plot, the story. It moves along quickly, and they get caught up in it, and they identify with the main character. I've written, I think, 52 books, and most of them have a female main character because it's easy for me to remember what it's like to be a girl. I have to imagine what it's like to be a boy, and I can do that. And I did it in The Giver. Despite the fact that it's a boy character, protagonist, and that's evident on the first page, kids of both genders respond to the book and react by identifying. And that's the most important thing in a book for any of us to read. We want to identify with the main character. That's who we keep company with throughout the book and why we turn the pages. So they like the boy, and they respond to the plot, but it's later, and very often I get letters from people who read it in 8th grade and now are adults, and maybe their kids are bringing it home and they've reread it and they're now responding at a different level. Or if the kids have a wonderful teacher, I can always tell that because the teacher encourages them to think as a result of the book, instead of just reading for the plot. Although you want the plot to carry them along, you want them to get more out of it than that. Mm-hmm. And so I have 4 replies because I get the same questions so often, but at the same time, I get these lengthy, thought-provoking letters. I got one recently from someone in India who wondered if I had studied Buddhism because he found a Buddhist theme throughout The Giver. At any rate, so my mail is always very interesting.
Did he say what Buddhist theme?
His letter was so long and so full of his philosophizing that I can't begin to tell you exactly what he said. And I don't have time to answer at huge length. So I have to condense my answers and make them brief, unfortunately. Yeah. So I can't answer your question. I'm sorry. Okay. I also have gotten letters from one man who said he had been born into and brought up in a cult, and he had fled that cult as an adult. And he was seeing a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist had told him to read The Giver.
Oh. Now that is interesting. Yeah. I could see how that might be an interesting read for him.
Yeah. He had lived within a world that was like the world of the giver. And now he was like the boy trying to extricate himself from that.
Right. And he had all of that freedom now and new experiences. How interesting.
Jonas is a great character. I was as horrified as Jonas was when he understands the community is murdering those deemed unfit to live with them. But I did feel that the book, in a really hopeful way, suggests that we have this deep morality that we can access despite what we're taught growing up or what our community norms are. And I was wondering for you, is that morality inborn? Is it through the exposure and empathy of the memories? Is it through the books? Where does Jonas's morality come from?
That's a good question. And I'm just making a note for myself here because I don't want to forget to mention this. In the first book, and when I wrote the first one, I didn't realize I would write others to follow it. Jonas is described as having an attribute that is only described as the ability to see beyond. He's seeing that there is something more than the world that he has known. And I didn't describe it any more than that. But when I later set out to write a second book that would be related to the giver, I decided also for that character to have one attribute. And in that case, and the second book was called Gathering Blue. It's a girl. And her ability is to see the future, but she does it through her fingers. She embroiders, and the future appears in these embroideries that she makes. But when I got to the fourth and final book, and the main character is the baby, Gabriel, from the first book, but now he's 14 years old. I had to figure out what his magic, that's the wrong word, but what his power was. And he's living in a different place now. He and Jonas are now living in a peaceful village, but he's watching a wrestling match. Two men in their village, and it's a celebration of some sort, a day of a festival, and these two guys are wrestling, and he suddenly feels himself to be inside one of them, and he can feel the strain and then celebration as the man finishes, and he feels powerful. And then it leaves him exhausted, and he doesn't know what has happened, but he gives it a name, and he calls it veering, V-E-E-R. And every now and then he veers and he enters somebody else and feels what that person is feeling. And that, I think, and it's appropriate that that's the final book, because that's the final attribute. That's the most important thing, because what he's feeling is empathy. Mm-hmm. If all of us had a high degree of empathy, the world would be a different place. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what ultimately I wanted to say. And in that final book, it's that boy using his veering capacity, his empathy, who battles and overcomes evil.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that brings us back to Jonas and Gabe's relationship, because Jonas now has the feeling of love that he gives to Gabe as a baby. That sacrificial act of taking Gabe with him on a long trip and a very hard journey, which would be harder having a baby with him. What led you to including that in the book? First of all, thank you for saving Gabe. I love the fact that he took him with him. But tell me about that part of the book and why you decided to include that.
It's very hard. I wrote that book in 1993, and I can't do the math, but that's many years ago. To recall what I was thinking of is difficult. But I will say that in retrospect, I have always regretted that the final portion of the book, after he takes the baby and leaves, I wanted that to be a very long and very difficult journey. But I was stuck with two characters, one of whom can't speak because he's a baby. And so there can't be any dialogue. And there's nobody else. And all I can do is just describe the landscape. I've never come up with a good solution, not that I could rewrite the book. But I felt as though that section of the book was too short. And not that I loved the movie, but at least in the movie, they were able to make it seem longer because they used different landscapes. There was desert and a river and things they had to cross and get to the snow eventually. But I'm not answering your question because I don't remember exactly what my thinking was. I left the ending ambiguous on purpose because I thought kids would enjoy using their own imagination, or teachers would enjoy having kids write the next chapter. Teachers do enjoy it. Kids don't, I find. They write to me angry. They would like to know exactly what happened. They would like it all spelled out. When I was young, I would have enjoyed ambiguity in a book, I think, and because I was a creative child, I would have liked to create my own ending. Not many kids do these days. I hope we're not watching the end of creativity. Let us assume not.
Lenny and I had two completely different ideas of what the next step in the book was. Lenny's was much more hopeful than mine, is what I will say. Well, I might as well just tell you. I was pretty sure that Jonas and Gabe froze to death.
Uh-huh.
And Lenny was pretty sure that they found their way to a beautiful, loving community.
Yeah. But how about a little of each?
Yeah. Why did you decide to write sequels that end up filling out Jonas's and Gabe's stories,
Okay.
at least helping me understand that my ending is not the actual ending?
Well, I don't remember how many years had passed before I wrote what turned out to be titled Gathering Blue. But it was a number of years and a number of books in between. So it was time to write a new book. And always when it's time to write a new book, somehow, magically, not the right word, but somehow from somewhere, a character appears to me. And it's always a character who comes with a name, and I can see that character in my imagination. And so I write that character down. And I place that character in a place that has some kind of situation, in the middle of a situation that is uncomfortable. And so that had happened. I had perceived a character, a young girl, probably about 14. She had a name. And I could see her sitting in this god-awful place, ugly and smelly. And she's seated beside the body of her mother. And it begins with dialogue. It says, "Mother." There was no answer. She hadn't expected one. Her mother had been dead now for 4 days. So I didn't know what that was about. But I began to describe the village that they're just outside of, on this field full of bodies. And I began to think it was prehistoric, perhaps. It was very primitive huts that they lived in. And I started worrying that I was going to have to research prehistoric animals and beasts and things, and woolly mammoths. I didn't know what was going on. And then gradually, as I continued writing and creating this very primitive society, I began to realize I could connect it to the giver. And therefore, I could use it in part to answer these letters that were starting to come in saying, what happened to Jonas and Gabe? So I approached the ending of the book, and the character in it walks a very long distance and finds another village and returns and says to the people when he returns, there's a boy there. And at first I put his name in. His name is Jonas. The editor asked me to take the name out. So I did. But it does say, I think he has very blue eyes. Yeah. And he's your age. And so that connected it. After that one was written, the third one could clearly connect it. And Jonas is a character, as is Gabe in the third book. But that second was kind of by accident. I was writing something else, and I figured out a way to connect it to the giver, which would in part answer the questions kids were asking me.
Yeah, that's great.
Lois, one of the things that Nancy brought up on our first talk about this book was that this book is sometimes part of book bans. And I was completely unaware of this and couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
Are you aware of this? And what are your thoughts surrounding it?
It happened almost immediately after the book was published.
Really?
The American Library Association publishes a list each year of the most challenged books in the United States. and The Giver appeared immediately among the most challenged. The city of Holland, Michigan, removed it from its public schools. And the reasons that people began to challenge it seemed to me off the mark somehow. And I think frequently, sadly, the people who challenge books frequently haven't read the entire book.
I agree with that.
When I was a kid in school back in the 50s, in high school, people would say, read page 79 of the Android 2. There was a sex scene. Okay, this wasn't the thing, but people now who don't take the time to read or think about a book may hear, I understand page whatever of The Giver is objectionable, let's challenge it. And what they chose to object to was the scene, two scenes. One is where the boy, Jonas, bathes an old woman. So there's a 12-year-old boy with a naked lady. Oops, let's ban that. I thought it was a very tender sort of scene with no sexual content. Yep. But the other one, perhaps less surprising, is where the father kills the baby. And there, if the reader is at all perceptive and reads the whole book, they will understand that it is not promoting euthanasia. But those are the two scenes that would have people holding up the book in front of school board meetings and shouting. And there was even a website that called me the Antichrist.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. Now, of all of the themes of the book, those are totally off my radar of what anyone would think shouldn't be a readable book.
And what I'm guessing, I have no way to confirm this, but my guess is that the people who select those two scenes, or one of the two, in order to object, they really are made uncomfortable by this book for another reason. And that is because a child, a boy, a 12-year-old in this case, is perceiving the hypocrisy of the adults and the government, and is taking action against it. And that makes some people very uncomfortable, particularly now. The book has not been banned as often recently as it had been early on. That I think is because in recent years there have been other books that have been more violent or more sexual in content. This book has none of that. So it's still occasionally called into question. I have discovered that when I have been asked to write letters to a local newspaper, for example, I've done that, but my letters don't have much effect. What happens is when teenagers, who can be very passionate and very articulate, when they go to the school board meetings and stand up and say why they like this book, it really has an effect. And I love being able to tell teenagers that they have a place in this world where they can make a difference. Mm-hmm. Excuse me for veering off into another topic, but I have a new book that I've just finished, and it won't be published till next year, but it takes place also in the future. But it's a time in which there have been no books for many, many years. And there is no longer any imagination or creativity. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
I did love in The Giver how there are virtually no books in the community except in the Giver's offices, and that's where all the books are. So I guess the people who were agitating to have your book banned didn't get the irony of them being people who didn't want books in the community. Thank you. I love talking about The Giver. One other thing that you mentioned in your biography, I was very sorry to read about the death of your son. He was a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force. You've written that his death instigated your involvement in finding ways to end conflict on our very fragile planet. Yeah. In what ways have you been involved in promoting peace?
I wish I could say I've had a huge effect. Although I guess, the only voice that I have is through my books. And so I think my feelings about the world do permeate my books in various ways.
Yeah.
I like everybody these days in this world of complex and difficult politics. I try to be out there speaking when I can for the things I believe in. And so most recently, I was out there holding a sign along with, I'm in a small Maine town, so there are not 12,000 people, but there might have been 1,200 of us holding the signs on the day that was called No King's Day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do. What we all do, what little we can. But one thing I do is talk to kids and remind them how important it is for them to understand the government process. When I was a kid, well, this may still be true, but I don't have any children or grandchildren still in school, so I don't know this. But we had pretty serious, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, course in what we called civics, in which we learned how the government works. I hope that kids still learn that. And I try to get them to appreciate what their role will be and how they must prepare themselves to fulfill that role, to understand how we're governed and what we want of our elected politicians.
That is such a key role. I think that must be an amazing feeling, realizing that your books are going to be read, I think, for hundreds of years. I mean, I don't see The Giver going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to challenge children and them thinking about their communities and what is working in their communities, what is not working, the role that they need to take. Must be an amazing feeling for you. I think books change the ways that we view the world. It's such a powerful medium.
But I don't ever want to overlook the important intermediary people who are librarians and teachers, people between me and those kids, and I suppose publishers as well. I mean, I sit here all alone, and I already said I'm an introvert, so I'm happy sitting here all alone writing my stories. But then it goes out there, and it's other people who put them out there and decide how and where they should go and why they should go there, and teachers especially. And I hear often from teachers who, after reading The Giver in school, challenge the kids to create what an ideal society would be like for them. And then they send me their and it's just wonderful to see how it triggers their imagination and I hope affects the future.
Well, very good. You mentioned a book that you're just concluding. Tell us more about what you're working on next and tease us all so we'll go running out there and anxiously snap up your next works.
This new book has taken me 2 years to write. I'm nowhere anywhere near thinking about what I'll do next. Plus the fact that I'm 88 years old, so my brain could deteriorate at any moment, though it doesn't seem to have yet. Once I give it to the publisher and they accept it, then it's a long period of time when they do all their magical stuff. And one of those things will be choosing a title, because we're still talking about that. Titles are important and difficult to come up with. Kids have often asked about book titles. I used to tell them the best title is something that's short and easy to say and easy to remember and gives you a hint of what the book's about, but doesn't tell you everything the book's about. And I used to tell them the best title in the world was one, and when I say the title to you, you'll be able to hum the music from the movie, and that title is Jaws. But I find kids don't know that movie anymore. That day has passed. I still feel as though that's a great title for the reasons I described. But anyway, so my new book does not have a title, but it has a pair of protagonists who are 14-year-old twins, boy and girl twins. And it's a complicated book, and I'm not going to tell you any more than that, except that it is set in 2099.
Oh.
And books have been banned since 2045.
Oh, wow.
When, as a celebration of the 100th anniversary of a war in the past, as part of that, books have been banned. So
Very interesting.
it's about what the world might be like.
I love this. And I love the fact that it's twins, because you have told us that as a child, you loved reading those
Oh,
twins
yes,
books
yes.
from different countries.
Yes, yeah. And I think I've mentioned twins. I've never used a pair of twins as book protagonists before. These are not identical twins, but a boy and girl twin, and they're interesting characters.
Interesting. Well, where can people best stay up with what you're working on, Lois?
Well, I do have a website, and I don't tend it the way I should. I actually have a person who tends it for me, but I don't instruct him as often as I should. But that is where people can email me, and do every day. I go first thing in the morning to my website email. That's probably how you got in touch with me.
It is indeed.
And then I send a snotty little answer to all the people who say they hate my book.
I love it.
A form reply to all the kids who say, "How did you get the idea for The Giver?" That's the most frequent question I'm asked. And then I spend a lot of sighing and writing answers to the people who tell me all their troubles
Oh,
and, ask my advice. And I send a sorry, but I can't do that to all the people who would like to send me the manuscript of what they're working on, because I just don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
But I do love the connection to the people out there whom, if I am sent off on a book tour, then I meet them in bookstores. But for the most part, I'm here by myself. And they're out there. And I do appreciate hearing from them and hearing their thoughts, even the obnoxious ones.
Well, we'll put a link on our page notes to your website for people who are interested in checking out. And there's lots of good information on there about you and your work.
Oh, I'm realizing that I need to update that something, because it talks with a biography. I wrote here's about me. And my husband died 6 weeks ago. And
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, my.
he's still alive in that biography, I think.
He
I'm going to have
is.
to go,
He
and
is.
that's going to be hard to erase him in some sensitive way.
Yes.
But you know what? That's what I do. That's what I write about: people's lives and the ups and downs, and the things we all go through, and the communities we form to help each other through them, and the books we read to get through them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like with love comes loss. I think you write about that beautifully.
No,
It's one with the other. Boy, you've had so much love in your life.
I've had a very fortunate life, and I'm just remembering something, and maybe I'll find a way to put that in the biography. My husband died on October 5th, so it's now 2 months ago. It seems like yesterday. But he was in the hospital, and I was there by his hospital bed, and he could no longer speak. But he gestured that he wanted pen and paper, so I gave him that. And he wrote down, and I still have this on my desk. He wrote, "I am a bird, I can soar."
Oh, my goodness.
What?
Now,
That's amazing.
My husband was not a poet or a writer. He was a doctor. He was a scientist. And yet something in those last hours made him feel as if he was soaring.
Wow.
I find that quite wonderful. And you mentioned the death of my son, who was a fighter pilot and who died in an F-15. We have a piece of sculpture we commissioned after his death. He was in Germany. His wife was German. My granddaughter is German. She's a teacher now in the German public schools. And so I can't show it to you, but it's an abstract sculpture, and it looks like wings.
Oh.
And the sculptor who made it wanted us to give it a name. And so my German daughter-in-law, the word is schweben, and that means to soar. And so we picture him soaring somewhere, and now we'll picture Howard, my husband, soaring there as well.
Wow. That's beautiful. What a wonderful story.
I don't know. We're all going to go soaring someday.
Let us hope. And in fact, the new book describes that. It's not connected to my son or my husband, but
Yeah.
it's connected to that becoming one with, which is something I'd like to believe in.
Ooh, I got chills.
Good ones, I hope.
Sounds very good.
Good ones. Good ones. Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a delightful conversation.
Oh,
I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us about, everything from your history as a little girl all the way up to present. It's, what a beautiful, heartfelt last episode of the year. What a beautiful way to
thank you.
Tie up 2026.
Thank you, Lois, for joining us. It was just a delight meeting you and talking to you. And thank you for sharing your life with us.
My pleasure. It's been fun being with you. I feel as though we're sitting in the same room having a cup of tea together.
I do too. I wish we were.
Nance, she talks about her observant nature. Mm-hmm. And how observing the people and the cultures around her, she learns about people. And in The Giver, the protagonist is very observant, isn't he?
Yes.
He's always observing the people around him. And through his eyes, then we understand his culture and what he's thinking and going through. I thought that was interesting.
You're right. We really see the world through his eyes, and it is him thinking about, well, this thing is happening, and here comes my friend on his bike, and here's my little sister, and what are the norms and mores that she does? She will be getting a bike this year. She will be of the age where she will get a bike. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
The other thing that I thought was interesting is this legacy that she leaves as an author. And because I'm not an author, I never really thought about that. Well, authors' work continues on well past the time they pass away, mm-hmm. that they have a voice. And one of the legacies that she has is that is how she does have a voice in our culture and mm-hmm. our society. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I think that authors have a unique position in a culture because they do speak to future generations long after they're gone. It's their words. It's what they are conveying through their work, whether it be entertainment or deep themes. A lot of times what a person believes in ends up somehow shaping their writing, not in a preachy way, but just this is the way they see the world. Yeah, she will be talking to future generations
of people.
Yeah, through her creativity. Yeah. Well, I love this interview. I love Lois. I think it's time for a trip to Maine, and maybe we can sit on her front porch and have some iced tea.
Well, she's a little spicy, so it could be fun.
Don't you love her answer to the
yes
people the boys who write her and have their say?
I love it. She has a good sense of humor.
She sure does. Well, Lenny, as we're heading into 2026, our first book is, which we have typically done, setting goals or resetting our thoughts for the new year. So for January 2026, our book is Shift, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You by Ethan Kross. This is a myth-busting, science-based guide that addresses the timeless question of how to manage your emotional life using the tools you already possess. So I am looking forward to reading this one.
Oh, yeah. This is right in my comfort zone. So yeah, I will enjoy it as well. Got to download it. It'll be Christmas reading for me. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of every month.
See you next time, Nance.
See ya.